All right, so this is going to be a bit of fun since I've always done this with StreamYard, which is just one directional. So I don't have no expectations regarding who is watching because I know that I can't interact with them. So I am realize I'm not even sure if this is streaming or not, but I am recording, and so if you want to ask questions, feel free to come on screen if you like. If you don't want to come on screen, you can ask me through the chat. Um, and either way, but otherwise, it will proceed much like my normal LinkedIn Lives, where I will kind of have a little presentation that will go on for about 10 to 15 minutes and then take any questions that you have. Uh, let's look at my chat. Let's submit. Okay. Hey, Jen, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. I was just explaining that this is different. Usually my LinkedIn lives are, just one directional. And so
Yes.
I really wanted to have the experience of people being more interactive through Zoom. So people feel free to be interactive. And it is being recorded, by the way. So if you want to ask something anonymously, you can do it through a DM and a chat to me, but hopefully we'll have a conversation here. That would be fantastic. And then I will start with, kind of a little bit of background and then open the floor to questions. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now, which hopefully I can do correctly. Okay. So this is the thing about having multiple screens. Okay, so hopefully you are seeing the slideshow, and I shall start from the beginning. All righty, and I'm going to put you over there. Oops, nope, I'm going to put you. There you go. Put you over there. All righty. So let's talk about insurance when we are using AI in our businesses. Now, most of you, hopefully all of you, have really the most basic types of insurance that we should have as professionals serving clients, and that is cyber and professional liability insurance. And so, we've had it, if you've been in business for a while, you've had your insurance for a while, and certainly probably predating the use of AI in your business. And it comes up for renewal every year. Mine renews in September. We'll see what it looks like. And haven't given much thought about whether or not errors or liability that's caused by your AI use is covered by your insurance. So we kind of think that somehow it's covered in there. But in fact, the insurance industry, like much of the regulation and use and ethics and the laws regarding AI usage, is lagging behind the extreme rate at which it's being incorporated into our daily lives and into our businesses. And so we need to really be thinking proactively about it. So the insurance that we should have, okay, hopefully I'm paying attention to who wants to come in. All right, let me make this. Okay. So the things that we should all have in our businesses are uh, error and emissions, also called professional liability. It also might be called malpractice in what you do. For me, it's called malpractice insurance as a lawyer. Doctors obviously malpractice, something we all are familiar with. So this is harder to do than I thought it would be. Okay, admit. And errors and omissions is another way that it is described, or professional liability insurance. Cyber liability insurance is the other one. That's one that many of us may not have because we don't, it's not an automatic part of a package. It is an additional fee, an additional policy. And so let's talk about what those cover. So I'm going to go over cyber liability first. because for the most part, that's not the big issue that I see personally with this group of experts. Our cyber liability covers things that go wrong. There are data breaches, cyber attacks, network failures. We need to have that because we handle client information, we have data, confidential information. We do want to make sure if there is a data breach that we are covered for it. But for most of us, that's not the biggest part of our business. What I really want to focus on today is the E&O piece. And so, what is E&O, or professional liability insurance? So, it covers losses that come from being a professional, and we make mistakes. We are human, and it takes into account that being 100% correct 100% of the time is very difficult to do. And so we want to make sure that if we're using our best professional judgment, and we still make an error and someone suffers a loss from it, that we are covered for it. And so again, whether you are a lawyer or a consultant or a marketer or a writer, we want to make sure that we're covered for mistakes that happen despite our best efforts. And so that's interesting about errors and omissions. Well, first, let me talk about the professional liability. There's two types of E&O. So there's professional liability for just making errors in the course of providing professional services. E&O also covers copyright infringement. That's how I first became familiar with E&O when back in my film business days. That also, if there is an accidental, unintentional copyright infringement, if you have correct E&O insurance, would also cover that intellectual property infringement. And so, as you can imagine, how that will come up during a conversation about E&O. So if there's unintentional copyright infringement, then it should cover you. Now, let's talk about how that plays out in with using AI. There's a number of things that are happening with AI, and obviously I can't cover all of them here, but a couple of examples are, autonomous decision making, such as agentic AI, if you've heard the term agentic or autonomous AI, and that they can make decisions. And we know that AI can hallucinate. I really don't like the term hallucination because it makes it seem, kind of random or crazy, which AI is not, but it simply is not, and it simply has the same limits that human beings have. Human beings can take in information and we can digest it and have an output that is an error. It happens. And it also happens with AI. How do we understand, like, when there is an error, how do we know that it was the model versus the human error? Like, if I make a decision based on my output, and it is a decision that anyone would make with that same information, but it's based on an error that came out of AI output, is that a human error or is that AI error? And how do we even think about, what happened? When we think, let's go back to the E&O coverage, how do we even know what happened inside of AI? That is a black box. Like, literally, we don't quite know how AI works. What happens in there? And so, how do we even defend ourselves to know, like, how did this happen? And so, when we think about, for instance, ChatGPT or Dolly or some, I can't remember all the names of our the tools you're probably using every day, transcription tools. I mean, you probably read that, make sure that you aren't, using your transcription tools or summaries, make sure you're checking them against the original transcript because it can make errors there. So if it creates infringing content, what might happen? Will you be denied coverage because you didn't create the content? You know, what is intended with professional liability insurance? Is it intended to cover just humans? Is it intended to cover, tools? Is it something done by a third party and therefore you need to get indemnification from the third party who created it? Think about if you were using a subcontractor, like you are creating a website content and you use a copywriter and you have an agreement with that copywriter who you ask them to make sure that everything that they deliver to you is free of copyright infringement, that it's original, and you ask them to provide indemnification, you ask them to have insurance. ChatGPT does not do that. ChatGPT says very clearly that we disclaim all liability for copyright infringement. We're not making any reps or warranties about the of our data set, and we're not making any reps and warranties about that output. So if you are using a tool that doesn't provide those insurances, will your insurance cover it as your action under your professional liability? Or will it say, like in the instance, if it was a subcontractor, will it cover the third party services? Generally, won't cover like software generated output. And then, is it unintentional? Isn't for intentional or grossly negligent actions. If you, for instance, you're a lawyer and you create a brief using 100% ChatGPT, you don't check any of the citations, you don't use any of your professional expertise to make sure that brief or that product is accurate. That is not just simple malpractice, that's gross negligence, right? You have not even begun to meet your obligations as a lawyer. And so where is the dividing point between regular negligence and gross negligence when we're using AI and we're not vetting the output? And by the way, this is like, there's no way for me to have like answers for you. This is mostly raising the questions that we need to be thinking about, that we need to take back to our insurance providers. There is many different policies as there are insurance providers. And so 100%, like what is currently in your policies that I know you have, what is in there really depends on the individual policy, and they will all do something different. Some of the things that have happened recently, insurance companies that use AI for claim processing, very famously, United Healthcare was using AI to deny a lot of claims. Their liability came in a different way than, from this type of liability, but it can go in the other direction. Using AI for claim processing that is able to make decisions, it makes incorrect decisions. Is there coverage for that? There are examples where they used AI to determine, what level of coverage a client should get. And the recommendation was to be underinsured. And then when there was a loss, the client wasn't covered because the insurance coverage wasn't adequate. And that was because of the use of AI. Where's the liability there? Is there insurance coverage for it? An example where AI recommended a high risk investment that led to significant losses. And all these are where, these things are being battled about whether or not the insurance will cover it or not. chat box that provided incorrect information. There was also another famous one in the, well, famous, I think is a little strong, but in the news, I think it was Canadian Airlines who had AI, you know, did some pricing and offer like $1 tickets or something like that. And they had to honor that. They could say, oops, obviously our tickets aren't at $1. Too bad. You used AI, that was the tool that you used, and now you have to live with it. You can't disclaim liability that comes from that. And so we really want to think about, does E&O cover human mistakes only? Professional liability was just that, for professionals, whether it's malpractice or, lawyers, doctors, consultants, creators. It was for professional services, and professionals are intended to be humans. And so, will it cover it when your AI is ultimately responsible for why the error was made, why poor decisions were made, why faulty advice was provided, why there ultimately is some sort of loss to your client? And it's very similar to the conversation about whether or not, whether or not something that's created by AI, generative AI, is covered by copyright law. It is a matter of degree. Yes, you're allowed to use AI generated content. Is it covered by copyright law? Is it covered by E&O? Probably a matter of degree. And again, there's no percentages in the Copyright Office example. There's no percentage, there's no formula to know whether or not it can be registered or not. It depends on a case by case basis. And probably it will come out the same way with respect to insurance coverage. Is something that is agentic AI, even if mostly when people are using agentic AI, they are using like a custom bot of some sort. And so it has been programmed and fed the information to make decisions that would be consistent with how you would make decisions. But when it does that without your intervention at all, are those professional services? If you do have some human oversight, how much is enough for it to go from being not professional services to being professional services and being covered? And so these are all questions you want to make sure that you are asking your broker so that what is covered. And honestly, your broker may not know the answer. I have asked brokers recently, and they're like, well, let me get back to you on that, because it really is still a developing area of law, but something that we want to make sure we're thinking about. I hope I didn't leave anybody out that wanted to join. So just to wrap up, we want to make sure we're really aware of how we're using AI and how much risk is associated with the type of AI that we're using, because there's more risk associated with using agentic AI without human oversight. I have a chat box on my website now. Now all it really does is it reads my website, and you can ask it a question like, can I copyright a logo or something? And but it could be wrong, and so we need to make sure, what risk we have AI that we use, and are we covered for that AI? In connection with our client agreements, I'm always harping on that. Make sure we understand what our obligations are in our client agreements. Does it say that we have to deliver something that's original? And if you're using AI to create that deliverable, well, you are in breach of that client agreement. If that then results in an infringement, are you covered under E&O? Because you see, you have a copyright breach and you have a contract breach, and do you have any coverage for it if you are using AI incorrectly? And then make sure that you're having conversations with your broker, as you add it. I did notice that there are some new policies. I think Lloyd's of London is one, Chubb's is one, who are creating AI specific policies. I have no idea what the cost. I'm not an insurance agent. This is just really been interesting to me as I've been thinking about this issue, is why I wanted to have this, what I want to have as a conversation today. So I'm actually going to stop sharing, um, because I really want to hear from everyone about, if they have. Jen, please unmute yourself.
I did, excuse me, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I came to this thinking it would be interesting, and a few minutes in, I'm thinking about all the exposure I've created for myself. So I've created some custom GPT bots
Mm-hmm.
to be used as sort of interesting lead magnets, or ways for people to enter my world and learn a little bit about me. And I guess the global question, ask good questions, get good answers, right? The global question that I want to ask is, if I put some sort of disclaimer somewhere that says, please check, or please consult your professional before taking action. I mean, is there anything like that proactively that we can do on the front end that it's never going to eliminate all of the risk, but it
Right.
might, a reasonable person might go, well, it did say.
Yeah, it helps you. I mean, yes, we should use disclaimers, probably because it was so microscopic at the bottom of my slides. It says, not legal advice, when we should have it, because we want to make sure that we do have defenses. Like we inform them that this is not a replacement for one-on-one advice. It's not specific to your circumstances. That's what professionals are for, to take your specific facts and apply their expertise to it. You're never going to get that from a presentation, a webinar, a freebie that you get on a handout. So absolutely, always use your disclaimers, and that at least in the event of a claim, that you do have that to help um, protect you.
Amazing. Thank you.
Mhm.
I wrote as fast as I could.
I think I'm recording this. If I'm not, I screwed it up. I am. Okay. Awesome. Good to see you, Margie and Denise.
I'm
Hey. So I don't see anything in the chat. Please feel free to unmute yourself if you have any questions at all. I have my insurance renewal, I think I mentioned, on September 1st, and amazingly, they always hit me on June 1st. I don't know why they need so much lead time, but I've just got my renewal notice. And so I will certainly be talking to them about it. I do use AI, in my business. I use it. Hi, Jamie. I use it to turn my recordings and my podcast into written content, and so I am a big fan of certain uses. But I'm obviously don't use it for client work, but I absolutely use it for my creative work. Yeah.
Hey, Aaron, I have a question, or
Yeah.
yeah, hopefully a question. How are you doing? I hope everyone is doing well. So my E&O professional liability insurance, right? They started, but since I'm in financial services, there's a requirement for me to now have like a written information security plan, which is also called a WISP, right? And so actually, the IRS is charging a lot of people, but specifically the financial services people. But if you handle anybody's PII, you may want to look into that. But I have a WISP, and I have the WISP developed. My E&O offers a cybersecurity rider package that I signed up for. But what I'm not sure, because they only asked me like a few questions in there, what I'm actually not sure is, does it cover? I don't really use IA to AI to give information. I use it
Right.
more to research to see if I'm missing something that I should be saying. So I don't really use it, but um in that writer, like what kind of language would I need to look for to see if it covers AI?
So it's very unlikely it will say something expressly, but it might expressly exclude software generated information, or it may only, it might exclude, third party um services or third party content. And your AI tool is a third party, I mean, that's kind of the funny thing about it. I asked, part of my research in doing this was, I know that if a lawyer doesn't really appropriately supervise a junior associate, so a junior associate goes off and they screw something up, the E&O, the malpractice would still cover the firm for that junior associate screw up. And a lot of us think about our AI as kind of like a junior associate, to kind of do that first draft, and then we take it from there. But at the end of the day, it is not like a junior associate from a legal perspective. It is a third party. And so you need to think of it as a subcontractor and not as kind of like an internal resource. And so look at it from that perspective, assuming it doesn't have explicit AI language. I've not seen it, but I don't look at a ton of AI insurance policies. But think about it as a subcontractor and what coverage you'd have for that. And you mentioned cyber, Jamie. I meant to say this earlier, is that cyber, we think, okay, technology, that's what cyber is for, something goes wrong. But at the end of the day, AI can be performing absolutely 100% of the way we intended it to. Everything, we put in our information, it did its process, and it spit something out, and it's wrong. And so that is not a cyber issue. Cyber is when something goes wrong. There's a breach, there's a hack, there's some sort of technological failure. That's not what's happening when we have an AI error. It worked the way it was supposed to. But it made errors because the reason we have E&O as professionals, because there's nuance, there's context, there are all these things that don't happen in AI world that happens in the real world, that helps inform the decisions and the advice that we provide. And that's what makes it so kind of weird, I guess. I use the word weird. Like, where does it fall? Like, is it professional services? Because I don't know how you describe professional services without that kind of, the context and the expertise that we bring to our engagements, right? And so where does that AI delivered advice fall? So that's a lot of questions. This is one without answers. I like to have answers, but this one is more questions than answers, that I encourage you to make sure that you are asking these questions and discussing them with your broker. All right, awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. Oh, Denise, please.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Erin, thank you so much for raising these questions, because, a lot of times your policy renewal comes along and you just say, yep, I'm good for just like last year, same
Yep,
terms.
exactly.
And so I appreciate the timeliness of this because it's about time for my renewal.
Yep. Please do. Please do. Yeah. Well, thank you, Jen. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. And again, there will be a recording of it if you didn't take furious notes like Jen did. And you can find that on my LinkedIn profile and probably on my YouTube channel as well. All right. Thank you all.
Thanks, Erin.
You're welcome.